All right, let's get ready to jump into India today. We're going to be looking at, well, the connection between Christians and the idea of a secular state in India. We're mainly using as our guide Christians in Secular India. It's a book by Abraham Vasile Thomas. It was written back in 74. So we're also going to be bringing in some more historical context. And I think our listeners are going to be very surprised. I know I was when I was researching this to find out that the very idea of what a secular state is, well, it's pretty different in India from what a lot of people, especially in the West, might think of.
Yeah, it's not quite the same. I think a lot of people, when they hear secularism, they immediately think about the separation of church and state. That's kind
Mhm.
of the classic Western model.
Yeah, and actually, even before we hit record, I think I might have even said that myself. But it sounds like that's not exactly how it works in India.
You're right, it's a bit different. In the West, like you said, secularism often means that religion and government are totally separate. But in India, it's more about the state respecting all religions equally and also not getting involved in how they practice their faith.
So it's not about trying to keep religion totally out of public life, but instead, the government is recognizing and respecting all these different religions equally.
Yeah, that's closer to how it works. And this idea of a secular state in India, it's not something that just came out of nowhere. It's deeply connected to India's history and its traditions.
That's really fascinating to me. So, can we sort of rewind a bit and talk about those historical roots? Like, where did this uniquely Indian way of thinking about secularism come from?
Well, a lot of it can be traced back to, believe it or not, ancient Hindu traditions. Like if
Yeah.
you think about the ancient Hindu monarchy, there was always a distinction between religious authority and civil authority.
Yeah.
The king was respected, maybe even seen as divinely appointed, but he wasn't necessarily the top guy in the religious hierarchy.
Oh, so there was already this built in system where the ruler could respect different faiths, and they wouldn't have to force one religion on everybody.
Right, exactly. And then over the centuries, this concept got shaped even more, especially through all of India's interactions with all these other religions and cultures. Think about the influence of Muslim rule, for example. You had some rulers like Akbar who were all about promoting religious tolerance, and then you had others who were more focused on enforcing, stricter Islamic law.
It really is just an incredible mix of different beliefs.
It is, and that back and forth, that tension between different approaches to religious tolerance,
Yeah.
it definitely played a role. It shaped how the idea of a secular state in India eventually came to be. And then, of course, you have the arrival of the British East India Company.
Ah, yes, the British. I bet they brought their own ideas about religion and how to govern, right?
They did. But their initial approach, at least, was mostly one of neutrality. They didn't want to interfere too much in religious matters. Don't forget, they were mainly there for trade and commerce. They didn't want to get caught up in all these religious disputes.
From a purely business standpoint, I guess that makes sense. But did that hands-off approach last very long?
Well, not entirely. Over time, they started to support Christian missions, sometimes indirectly. And that caused some friction with some Hindus who saw it as a bit of a threat, like the British were favoring one religion over another.
Yeah, that must have been a difficult situation, trying to remain neutral on the one hand, but also maybe unintentionally favoring Christianity on the other.
It definitely was.
Yeah.
Plus, you can't forget that the British also brought Western education to India and Western values. And that started to really change things. Like the whole intellectual and social landscape in India began to shift. You had people like Ramahan Roy, who was really influential. He was a social reformer, very much inspired by Western ideas. And he really pushed for a more secular and rational approach to religion.
So even before India became independent, all these different forces were already coming together. It's like they were setting the stage for the idea of a secular state.
That's a great way to put it. And it all kind of led up to these incredibly important debates, the debates around the framing of the Indian Constitution. You had people from all these different religious communities. They were arguing passionately about, well, the future of their newly independent nation.
That's got to be a really intense moment, right? Like, what kind of questions were they even wrestling with in those debates?
I mean, you had so many important issues on the table, but one of the biggest ones was the idea of separate electorates based on religion. The Muslim League, for example, they were really pushing for this system, which was meant that different religious groups would have their own separate voting constituencies.
Oh, wow. So instead of voting as one united nation, people would have been divided along religious lines.
Exactly. And in the end, that idea got rejected because a lot of people saw it as, well, divisive. And it went against this whole idea of national unity that they were trying to build.
It's amazing to think about all these challenges, trying to create a system that respects everyone's religious freedom, but also keeps the country unified.
It was a delicate balancing act for sure. And another really crucial debate was about the right to propagate religion. Like, could people share their faith with others? And if so, what were the limits?
So did they end up putting any limits on that right?
They did. The Constitution says that people have the right to share their religion, but there are some limitations. They put in some safeguards.
What kind of safeguards are we talking about?
Well, mainly to protect public order, morality, and health. They wanted to make sure that this freedom to share your faith, well, that it wouldn't be used to disrupt social harmony or to, infringe on the rights of others.
Yeah, it makes sense that they would want to prevent any kind of misuse of that freedom.
Right. And it's important to remember that these weren't just, theoretical debates. They actually played out in some really concrete ways, especially in the years after India gained independence. There were some really specific events and challenges that really tested the idea of secularism in India.
Which leads us to some of the key flashpoints, right? Like the Niyogi Commission report from, was it 1956? Can you tell me more about that?
Oh, absolutely. The Niyogi Commission was a state-appointed inquiry. It happened in Madhya Pradesh, and it was specifically focused on Christian missions. And it caused quite a stir.
What was it about Christian missions that caused such a stir?
Well, the report raised concerns about how foreign funds were being used. Like,
Mm-hmm.
were they being used to try to convert people to Christianity?
Mm.
There were even some allegations of forced conversions.
So it kind of brought to the surface some anxieties that were already there about, Christian missionaries and their methods.
It did. And it really forced people to think about, well, where do you draw the line between someone's right to share their religion and the possibility of coercion or undue influence,
Mm.
especially when it comes to people who are, maybe more vulnerable.
Yeah, it sounds like a really complex issue.
It was, and it still is.
Mm.
That report, it had a real chilling effect on missionary activity for a while. And it raised all these questions about, the limits of religious freedom, questions that India is still grappling with today.
It really does sound like it opened up a whole can of worms that hasn't been fully closed yet.
You could say that, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have another big example, what they call the liberation struggle. This one happened in Kerala in 1957, and it involved a democratically elected communist government.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that. It was a really tense time with lots of protests against the government's policies. Can you remind me what the main issue was there?
Sure. Basically, the government was trying to implement what they considered to be, progressive reforms, especially in areas like education and social welfare. They wanted to give the state more control over schools, for example.
And that's where the conflict arose.
Yes, a lot of Christians felt like these policies, well, they were infringing on their religious freedom and that they were a threat to their institutions.
It must have been a tough spot for the Christians in Kerala. You have a democratically elected government trying to do what they think is best, but then you have people feeling like their religious freedom is under attack.
It was definitely a complex situation. And it shows you how, even when a government has good intentions, there can still be tension between them and religious groups, even in a country with a secular constitution.
Yeah, it's not a guarantee that those kinds of clashes won't happen.
Not at all. The liberation struggle really shows how policies that might seem fine to some people can actually be perceived as threats by others, especially religious communities. It shows that there needs to be constant dialogue and understanding between the government and religious groups.
Well, important.
And then you also have the anti-cow slaughter agitation of 1966. This one was really interesting.
What was that all about?
Well, it was a big movement led by some Hindu groups, and they were pushing for a national ban on cow slaughter. It really shows how deeply people's religious beliefs can impact public policy, even in a country that's officially secular.
I mean, cows are sacred in Hinduism, right?
They are, and killing a cow is seen as a very serious offense. So for them, it wasn't just about animal rights, it was about protecting something sacred.
It's fascinating how something that seems like a straightforward issue,
Yeah.
like animal welfare, can have all these deeper layers of religious significance.
Absolutely, and really shows how religion and politics are just intertwined in India.
Looking back at all these events, it seems like the path to a secular India hasn't exactly been smooth sailing. But I'd love to hear more about how Christian communities specifically, how they adapted to this new secular state. Did they try to hold on to the old ways of doing things? Or did they find new roles for themselves in this changing environment?
Well, it was kind of a mix of both, to be honest. There were a lot of different responses, which makes sense when you think about how diverse the Christian community in India really is.
Do you have any specific examples, like groups that really carved out new roles for themselves?
Yeah, definitely. Some churches really got involved in social service and community engagement, like the industrial team service in Bangalore in the 1960s is a great example.
In Bangalore, why Bangalore? What was so unique about that situation?
So Bangalore in the 60s, it was going through this huge transformation, becoming a major center for industry and technology. You had factories springing up everywhere, people moving from rural areas to find jobs. It was a classic story of modernization and, rapid economic growth. But with all that came a whole new set of social problems.
Yeah, I can imagine. You have all these people moving to a new city, facing all these new ways of life, probably feeling pretty lost and disoriented. What did that have to do with the church?
The church saw what was happening. They saw these workers, facing difficult conditions, struggling to adjust, feeling isolated, and they knew they had to do something to help.
So they started doing more charity work.
It was more than just charity. This group, the Industrial Team Service, they really wanted to address the root causes of these problems. They were mostly folks from St. Mark's Cathedral in Bangalore. And they were really pioneers in this area. They saw how industrialization was impacting people's lives, and they wanted to find ways for the church to respond effectively.
What did they actually do? Did they just focus on helping Christians?
They did offer support to Christian workers, sure, but they went way beyond that. They started these training programs to help workers learn new skills. They organized social events so people could build community. They even did research to really understand the challenges these workers were facing.
So it sounds like a very holistic approach, not just focused on their spiritual needs, but also, their social and economic well-being.
Exactly. And they weren't afraid to tackle some of the bigger systemic issues, too. They worked with labor unions to fight for better working conditions, helped workers understand their rights. They even got involved in policy discussions. They were really trying to make difference.
That's amazing. It sounds like they were really ahead of their time in a lot of ways.
They were. They were really at the forefront of social change in Bangalore. And they weren't alone, You saw churches all over India getting involved in social service. They were providing education, healthcare, advocating for the marginalized. They were putting their faith into action.
It's really putting that whole faith without works is dead idea into practice.
It really is. These were Christians who were finding practical, tangible ways to live out their faith, even in a secular context.
You mentioned the Christian Medical Association of India earlier. What were they doing?
Oh, the CMAI is an incredible organization.
Yeah.
They bring together Christian medical professionals from all over India, and they've been so important in providing healthcare services, especially in rural areas where it's often really hard to find good quality healthcare.
Yeah, those are often the areas that the government struggles to reach.
Exactly.
So were they just focused on treating illnesses, or did they have a broader approach?
Oh, they did a lot more than just treat people when they were sick. They were really big on preventative care, health education. They had training programs for healthcare workers. And they focused on some of the biggest health challenges like maternal and child health, HIV/AIDS prevention, tuberculosis.
So they were really getting at the root of the problem, not just putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms.
Exactly. They understood that good health is about more than just medicine. And they were able to reach so many people. They had this amazing network of Christian hospitals and clinics all over the country. They really became a crucial partner for the government in trying to improve public health in India.
So they were kind of like a bridge between the government and the people.
You could see it that way. And the CMAI, just like the Industrial Team Service, they really show how Christians were taking this very hands-on, practical approach. It wasn't about trying to convert people. It was about making a difference in the lives of those around them.
And that brings us to another area where Christian communities have been very active, right? Education.
Absolutely. Education has always been seen as a way to empower people, to bring about social change. And Christian institutions, they've played such a major role in India's education system, especially when it comes to higher education. I mean, so many of India's top colleges and universities were founded by Christian missionaries.
I know that the idea of religious institutions, especially ones that are part of a minority religion, running schools in a secular state can be controversial. Were there any concerns raised about this in India?
Oh, for sure. It's definitely a complex issue, and it's been debated a lot. Some people argue that religious institutions, by their very nature, well, they promote a certain worldview, and so they might not be fully committed to the principles of secular education.
What were some of the specific fears?
People worried that these schools might prioritize religious teachings over academics, or that they might discriminate against students from other faiths.
It makes sense that people would have those concerns.
It does. But on the other hand, you also had people arguing that, look, these institutions, they have a long history of providing a really good education.
Hmm.
And they often serve communities in ways that government schools just can't, especially in rural areas where the state might not have the resources.
So they were seen as both a potential problem and a potential solution.
Exactly.
Did India find a way to balance those two perspectives?
They tried to. The Constitution allows for the establishment of religious schools and colleges, but it also has regulations to make sure they operate within the framework of, secularism.
What kind of regulations?
Well, one of the big ones is that these schools can't discriminate based on religion. They have to admit students from all backgrounds. And religious instruction can't be mandatory.
So no forcing kids to convert or anything like that.
Right. The government also keeps an eye on the curriculum to make sure it aligns with secular principles and doesn't push any particular religious ideology. And they do regular inspections to make sure everyone's following the rules.
That sounds pretty thorough. Did it work? Did it prevent problems?
It's a good question. And it's still being debated today. Some people argue that those regulations aren't always enforced properly, and that some religious institutions might still find ways to discriminate or try to convert students.
That's a serious concern, especially in a country where communal tensions can be so high.
It's true,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also important to acknowledge that. Well, a lot of people believe that most religious institutions, including those run by Christians, they're genuinely committed to providing a good secular education, and they want to play a positive role in Indian society.
It's a complicated issue, and it sounds like India is still figuring it out.
Yeah, it really shows the challenges of balancing religious freedom with the principles of a secular state.
This conversation makes me think about the whole issue of religious conversion in India. It seems like such a sensitive topic. And in a country as diverse as India, it's bound to create some tension, right? How has India, as a secular state, dealt with this issue?
Oh, it's one of the most hotly debated topics in India. It really gets to the heart of what religious freedom means in practice.
Because you have this right to share your faith. But then the question becomes, where do you draw the line?
Exactly. The Constitution guarantees freedom of religion, including the right to propagate your faith, but it also makes it clear that this right isn't absolute.
So what are the limits?
The state can put restrictions on religious propagation if it's necessary to maintain public order, morality, or health. And that's where it gets tricky, because sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between simply sharing your faith and using coercion or pressure to try to get someone to convert.
It's a fine line to walk.
It is.
So how has India tried to define that line?
There have been so many legal cases and debates over the years trying to figure out what's acceptable and what's not. The courts have made it very clear that any conversion obtained through force, fraud, or trickery is illegal. No question about it.
So no bribing or threatening people into converting?
Nope, absolutely not. But when it comes to more subtle forms of influence, like offering money or social benefits to people who convert, that's where it gets a lot more complicated.
Yeah, because it could be seen as taking advantage of people who are already vulnerable.
Exactly. People who oppose this kind of practice, they say it's a form of coercion, even if it's not overt. They question whether someone is really converting freely or if they're just doing it out of desperation.
Wow, it brings up some really deep questions about free will and choice.
It does. And it's tied to bigger issues of social justice and economic inequality. Like, if someone is only converting to improve their economic situation, can we really say that's a genuine conversion?
That's the question, isn't it? Has India found a good solution to this problem?
Well, it's a constant balancing act. The state wants to protect religious freedom, but they also want to prevent exploitation and keep the peace between different communities. It's a tough job, and they haven't always gotten it right.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like there's an easy answer that will make everyone happy.
That's the reality of living in a diverse and democratic society. These kinds of challenges are going to come up, and the solutions are rarely simple.
This whole conversation really highlights how unique Indian secularism is.
Absolutely.
It's something that's constantly being tested and refined.
And it's important to remember that Christian communities, they're a big part of that process. They're shaping the meaning of secularism in India through their actions and their engagement with the state.
And speaking of engagement with the state, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the internal debates within the Christian community itself. about their role in Indian politics. Is there a consensus on how Christians should be involved in politics?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll definitely explore in the final part of our deep dive.
So we're back and ready to wrap up our look at Christians in secular India. It's been a fascinating journey, to say the least.
You really have.
We've talked about the history, the constitution, the challenges faced by Christian communities. And now I think it's time to tackle what might be the most sensitive and definitely the most debated topic of all.
You're talking about the role of Christians in Indian politics.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a big one.
I mean, it makes sense that this would be such a controversial issue.
Yeah.
Churches running schools or hospitals, that's one thing. But getting involved in politics, that's a whole other ballgame.
It is.
Politics can get pretty messy pretty quickly.
You're not wrong about that.
So I'm really curious to hear how the Christian community in India views this.
Well, like most things in India, it's complicated. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. You have a whole spectrum of opinions on how Christians should approach politics, or even if they should be involved at all.
That's really interesting. Can you break down those different perspectives for me?
Sure. So on one end of the spectrum, you have those who believe that Christians should stay completely out of politics. They think the church should stick to its spiritual mission and avoid getting entangled in worldly affairs.
It sounds almost like a separation of church and state idea, but within the Christian community itself.
Yeah, you could see it that way. They might argue that politics is inherently corrupting, and that if the church gets involved, it risks losing its moral authority, its ability to speak truth to power.
So they're trying to maintain this sort of prophetic distance from the political arena.
Right. They believe that the church's role is to hold political leaders accountable, no matter what their religion is, and to speak up for justice and righteousness from a place of, well, moral authority.
That makes sense. But I imagine there's another side to this coin.
Oh, absolutely. There are plenty of Christians who believe that their faith shouldn't be limited to private life. They feel they have a moral obligation to get involved in the public sphere, to bring their values and beliefs to the political arena.
So they're not just trying to separate themselves from the world, they're trying to actively shape it.
Right. They see political involvement as a way to actually live out their faith, to love their neighbor, to work for the common good, to stand up for the marginalized.
It sounds like we have two very different viewpoints here.
We do.
And both are coming from a place of deep conviction.
Absolutely.
So how does this play out in reality? Do churches in India ever openly endorse specific political parties or candidates?
Generally, no. The official church hierarchy tries to avoid taking sides. They don't want to alienate members of their community who might have different political views.
So it's a strategy of neutrality.
I think that's a fair way to put it. But that doesn't mean that individual Christians or Christian organizations are completely silent on political matters. There have been many times when they've spoken out about issues that are important to them.
What are some examples? What kind of issues have mobilized Christians to get involved politically?
Well, education is a big one. As we discussed earlier, Christian institutions have been very vocal about protecting their right to run schools and colleges. They want to do it according to their own principles while still following the rules of the secular state.
So they're pushing back against what they see as government overreach.
Exactly. They've also been very active in advocating for religious freedom in general and speaking out against any attempts to restrict religious conversion or limit the activities of religious minorities.
So they're trying to strike a balance.
Right. They want to protect their own interests.
Yeah.
But they also want to promote a broader culture of religious freedom and tolerance in India. And that often means working together with other religious minorities who face similar challenges.
It makes sense that they would find common cause with other groups who feel marginalized or under threat.
It does.
So even though the church hierarchy might not be openly partisan, they're still finding ways to engage in politics and advocate for their community.
Right. They might work behind the scenes, lobbying politicians, doing media campaigns, mobilizing grassroots support.
It's a more subtle approach, engaging with the system strategically without necessarily picking a side.
Exactly.
It sounds like they're trying to find a way to be both faithful Christians and engaged citizens in a country that's still figuring out what secularism really means in practice.
That's a great way to summarize it. It's a complex and nuanced situation. But it's a really fascinating example of how a religious community can navigate the challenges of a pluralistic society.
I completely agree. Learning about this whole relationship between Christians and the secular state in India, it's been eye-opening.
I'm glad to hear that.
I feel like I have a much better understanding now.
It's a story that deserves to be told. It offers so much insight into the challenges of living together with differences.
Well, I think it's safe to say that our deep dive has come to an end. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and guiding us through this complex topic.
It's been my pleasure.
I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have too.
Me too.
India's experiment with secularism, with all its ups and downs, offers valuable lessons for the whole world.
It really does.
It reminds us that finding ways to balance individual rights with the common good and fostering dialogue and understanding between different communities, well, those are ongoing challenges that we all face. So to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it as thought-provoking as we did. Until next time.